The hall of crystal towers shimmered under alien suns. Thousands of eyes watched as the human stood at the edge of the throne room. His name was Elias, a stranger from a distant world. To the Empire of Zaith, he was a curiosity, a weak creature taken in marriage not for honor, but for mockery. At the center of the hall sat Princess Aranel, daughter of the High Lord. Her silver hair spilled like light, her eyes glowing with cold pride. She had been forced into marriage with the human, a political game meant to insult her. Her people laughed, whispering, "The warrior princess now belongs to a fragile thing." To them, Elias was harmless, soft, incapable of lifting a blade, but Aranel's gaze lingered on him longer than she wished. There was something in the way he stood, quiet, steady and unbroken. The court mocked him, offering him gifts too heavy to carry. They sneered as they watched his silence, expecting him to stumble, but Elias did not stumble. He bowed with calm dignity. The lords of Zaith laughed harder, their voices echoing through the hall, and in their laughter, Aranel's heart twisted. She despised this human, yet something about his calm unnerved her. Rumors spread across the empire. The princess's husband cannot fight. He is nothing more than a shadow, they said. But whispers carried another note. Quieter, dangerous. Why does he not break? Why does he endure? One night, in the gardens of the palace, Aranel confronted him, her voice sharp as a blade. Why do you not speak? Why do you not fight back? Elias looked at her with steady eyes. I do not need to prove myself to their laughter, he said. His words struck her, simple yet unshaken. She turned away, unsettled, not knowing why her chest tightened. But danger was never far. The dominion of Zaith had enemies, rivals who longed to break their power. And when assassins slipped into the palace one night, blades aimed for the princess's throat, it was not her guards who saved her. It was the human. Elias moved with a speed no one expected. In silence, he caught the blade with his bare hand, blood spilling, and then with his other hand, he drew a weapon no one had seen before, a sword, forged not by alien hands, but by his own people. The steel sang as it cut through the dark. The assassins fell one by one, and the harmless husband stood in the moonlight, his sword blazing with deadly promise. When it ended, silence filled the garden. The princess stared, her chest rising and falling. The man she thought was harmless had revealed himself, not weak, not broken, but dangerous. Her heart trembled, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. For the first time, she looked at him not as a joke, but as a man who could change everything. And in the shadows beyond the palace walls, unseen eyes watched. The human was no longer invisible. He was a threat, and the empire would never be the same. The palace did not sleep after the attack. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crystal halls. The human fought, they said. The human killed with his own blade. The laughter that once filled the court had changed into uneasy silence. For a man they mocked as harmless had revealed a hidden storm. Princess Aranel walked through the corridors with her head high, but inside, her thoughts twisted like tangled vines. She had seen Elias fight, she had seen his blood, and she could not forget the way his sword moved. Sharp, precise, deadly. He had saved her life, though she had never asked for it, and that unsettled her more than the blades of her enemies. At the council table, the lords argued, "He is dangerous." One growled, "A human with such skill cannot be trusted." Another sneered, "Perhaps he was planted by our enemies. Perhaps the princess herself hides his true nature." The High Lord raised his hand, silencing them. "Let him live, but watch him," he ordered. "Every step, every word. Nothing is to be hidden from our eyes." So Elias became both husband and prisoner. Everywhere he walked, shadows followed. The guards watched him with narrowed eyes. Servants whispered in corners. But Elias did not flinch. He trained quietly in the gardens when no one watched. He studied the palace halls, as if learning their secrets. And though they thought him silent, he was listening to everything. Aranel confronted him again, her voice sharp with suspicion. Why did you hide your strength? Why pretend to be harmless? Elias looked at her, his eyes steady as always. Because power revealed too soon becomes weakness, he said. Sometimes the strongest blade is the one no one sees until it strikes. Her breath caught. Though she tried to hide it, she wanted to despise him, but her heart would not obey. He had been given to her as a humiliation, yet now he stood taller than the proudest of her people. And though she hated the thought, she began to wonder if fate itself had placed him by her side. Beyond the palace walls, the story spread to the streets. Merchants whispered, soldiers murmured, slaves repeated the tale in secret. The human carries a sword, they said. The human is not weak. The empire had lived on arrogance for centuries, but now a seed of doubt had been planted, and doubt, once born, grows faster than fire. That night, Aranel could not sleep. She found herself walking the silent halls, drawn by an unseen pull. In the training courtyard, she saw Elias again, his sword glowing faintly under the moons. His movements were steady, controlled, yet there was a sorrow in his stance, as if every strike was not only practice, but memory. She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. Who taught you? She asked quietly. He did not stop, only answered. A world you will never see, a world they took me from. For the first time, she heard not just strength in his voice, but grief, and in that grief, she found something unexpected. Truth. He was not only her husband by force, not only a threat to her people, he was a man carved by loss, carrying a fire they could not understand. When their eyes met, the air between them shifted. Not warmth, not trust, but something dangerous. A bond neither had chosen, yet neither could deny. Far above the palace, unseen in the stars, a new enemy stirred. The assassins had not acted alone. There were forces outside the Dominion who now whispered the human's name. For if a single man could shake an empire, then he was no longer just a husband. He was a weapon. The palace glittered with light, but beneath its shine, shadows grew deeper. Whispers carried through the empire like smoke. The human fights, the human kills, the human stands unbroken, they said. The lords of Zaith pretended to laugh, but their laughter was thinner now, for they knew what laughter could not hide. Fear. Princess Aranel sat in her chamber, the moonlight falling across her silver hair. Her thoughts refused to quiet. The image of Elias's sword burned in her mind. The way he moved, the way he bled, yet did not fall. She had called him harmless, but now she could no longer believe her own words. She hated him for breaking her pride. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she hated herself more for feeling something else. A strange pull she could not name. Meanwhile, far beyond the palace walls, the enemies of the Dominion gathered. Rivals who had watched the Empire grow fat with arrogance. They had heard of the human with the hidden blade. Some feared him. Others saw an opportunity. If the Dominion trembles at one man, they whispered, perhaps he is the blade we can turn against them. Back in the Crystal Court, the lords argued again. He is a danger. One hissed. We should kill him quietly before he grows stronger. Another shook his head. If we kill him, the people will ask why. Their whispers will turn against us. The High Lord leaned back on his throne, his eyes cold. Then we watch. We bind him with golden chains. Let him live, but never free. So Elias remained at the princess's side, bound by ceremony but watched like a prisoner. Every word he spoke was measured, every glance recorded. But in silence, he was learning. He studied the guards, the gates, the patterns of power, and though the lords thought him still harmless, he was shaping his strength for the moment it would be needed. Aranel confronted him again, her voice sharp, though her heart trembled. Why do you not fight them? Why do you not rise against their chains? Elias looked at her with calm fire. "Because the sword is not for pride," he said. "The sword is for the moment when no chains remain." His words struck her harder than steel. For her whole life she had been taught to fight for honor, for pride, for the glory of her house. But Elias spoke of something else, of freedom, of survival, of truth. And in that truth, she felt both fear and respect. One night, as storms rolled across the alien sky, the attack came, not from assassins in the dark, but from outside the palace walls. Ships of rival clans descended with fire, their weapons striking the towers of crystal. The palace shook, guards shouted, chaos spread, and in the heart of that chaos, Elias stood beside Aranel, his blade flashing like lightning. She watched him fight not for pride, not for power, but for her. Every strike he made was not to impress, but to protect. The harmless husband she had once despised was now the wall between her life and death. And when the battle ended, when the smoke cleared, she could not speak. Her chest ached with something she had never known before, respect and something far more dangerous. For in that moment, Aranel began to see what the lords feared most. The human was not only a husband, not only a sword, he was a spark. And sparks, once lit, can burn empires to the ground. The attack on the palace had ended, but the walls of crystal still trembled with unease. The lords of Zaith gathered again, their voices sharp with fear. "The rival clans grow bold," one said, "but the greater danger is within our own hall." Their eyes turned not to the invaders, but to Elias, the human who had stood unbroken. What was once laughter had become suspicion, and suspicion is sharper than any blade. Princess Aranel sat at her father's side during the council. She kept her face calm, but inside her heart twisted. Every word spoken against Elias burned her. They called him dangerous, untrustworthy, a shadow meant to poison their bloodline. She wanted to deny them, yet her silence held her prisoner. For to defend him openly was to admit she no longer despised him, and she was not ready for the Empire to know her heart. That night the betrayal came, not from the enemy outside, but from within the palace walls. A servant entered with a tray of food, his hands shaking. But Elias's eyes narrowed. He had seen such tremors before. With a sudden movement, he struck the tray aside. The cup shattered on the floor, and the scent of bitter poison filled the chamber. The servant fell to his knees, begging for mercy. But before guards could seize him, a thin blade pierced his chest from the shadows. A second figure vanished into the darkness, leaving only silence. Elias stood ready, sword drawn, his body a shield before the princess. Aranel's heart raced as she looked at him, her human husband, standing between her and death again. Later, when the halls were quiet, she confronted him. Her voice shook, though she tried to sound cold. "They will never stop. You should have let them kill me. It would have freed you." Elias looked at her, his gaze steady. "I do not fight for freedom from you," he said. "I fight because you are mine to protect, whether you hate me or not. I will never let them take you." Her breath caught, her chest tight. For the first time, his words struck deeper than any blade. She had called him weak, despised him as a humiliation, but in the shadows of betrayal, he was the only one who did not waver. Days passed, and whispers grew louder. The Lord spoke of removing Elias quietly. The servants carried rumors of spies, hidden even among the guards, and in the streets outside the palace, people whispered a dangerous tale. The princess's human fights like a lion. The lords fear him. The empire trembles at his name. Aranel began to walk beside Elias, with different eyes. Her hatred no longer burned, replaced by a strange and dangerous respect. She found herself watching his hands when he trained, listening to his quiet words. He was not loud like her people, not proud, not boastful, but in his silence was strength, in his calm was power, and she realized the truth. The sword he carried was not his only weapon. The greater weapon was his will. One evening, as crimson moons hung over the sky, Aranel asked him softly, "Why do you protect me when my people mock you? When I mocked you?" Elias sheathed his blade, his eyes meeting hers. "Because even a caged bird deserves the sky," he said. Her heart stilled at his words. Simple, yet heavy with meaning. Far beyond the palace, unseen forces gathered strength. Rivals of the Dominion, spies of forgotten empires. They whispered the human's name, planning to use him, planning to destroy him. But inside the crystal walls, a different danger grew. For Princess Aranel was no longer certain where her loyalty belonged. To her empire, or to the man she once called harmless. And the longer she looked at Elias, the more she feared her answer. The palace had grown colder since the betrayal. Every corridor carried whispers. Every glance carried suspicion. Elias walked in silence, always watched, always judged. Yet the more they tried to chain him, the more unbroken he appeared. Princess Aranel felt the change in herself more than she wished to admit. She had called him a weakness, yet now she walked beside him with hidden pride. She had once despised his silence, but now she found comfort in it. For in his silence, there was no deceit, no poison, only truth. One evening, under the crimson moons, she found him again in the garden. He stood with his sword drawn, practicing alone. Each movement was slow, deliberate, full of discipline. She watched quietly until he stopped, his eyes lifting to meet hers. "You should not be here," he said, his voice low. Aranel raised her chin. "And why not? Am I a prisoner too?" His lips curved faintly. Not quite a smile, but close. "You are not a prisoner," he answered. "You are the reason I still fight." Her breath caught, her heart trembling, though her face stayed calm. She wanted to deny him, to push away the fire in his words, but her pride could not stop the truth. It stirred something inside her she could no longer ignore. She stepped closer, her silver eyes sharp, yet uncertain. "They say you will bring ruin," she whispered. "They say you are a danger to us all." Elias's gaze did not waver. "I will bring ruin only to chains," he said, "and danger only to those who wish you harm." Her chest tightened, his words wrapping around her like unseen fire. She had grown up surrounded by warriors who shouted of honor. But this human, this man she had called harmless, spoke of loyalty without demand, and in that loyalty, she felt both fear and longing. The following day, the lords tested him again. They demanded he kneel before them, to show the empire his obedience. The hall filled with laughter as they ordered him to bow. But Elias stood tall, his voice steady. "I bow only to truth," he said, "and I will never bow to fear." The court fell silent, the laughter dying like smoke. Aranel's heart pounded as she watched him. For the first time in her life, she felt pride not for her people, but for him. The human who had been given to her as a joke now stood taller than the lords who mocked him. That night, she found him again. The moons were high, and the garden glowed with silver light. For a long time, she said nothing, only stood beside him in silence. Finally, her voice broke the stillness, soft but certain. "You are not harmless," she whispered. "And I was a fool to believe it." Elias looked at her, his eyes steady, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "I never wished to deceive you," he said, "but I will always protect you." Her chest ached with the weight of his words, and in that moment, the bond between them shifted, not forced by the court, not bound by politics, but chosen, dangerous, undeniable, unspoken, far beyond the palace walls. Enemies prepared their next strike. But inside the crystal towers, something greater than war had already begun. A bond of fire, a bond of steel, a bond that no empire could control. The empire believed the palace was unshakable, but on the night of the twin moons, fire rained from the sky. Enemy ships descended through the clouds, their weapons striking against the crystal towers. Alarms rang, soldiers scrambled, and the air filled with screams. Princess Aranel was rushed toward the inner chamber, but she pulled away, her eyes searching for Elias, and there he was, already standing at the gates, sword drawn. His body was steady, his gaze sharp, no longer the quiet husband mocked by the court, but a warrior ready to carve a path through fire. The invaders stormed the halls, blades and plasma glowing. The Lord shouted orders, but their voices shook. Elias moved before them, his sword flashing like lightning. Every strike was clean, precise, and final. The rebels had expected weakness, but instead they met steel. And in the chaos, Aranel fought at his side, her own blade singing as it clashed against the enemy. For the first time, they moved as one. Her fury and his calm forming a storm the invaders could not break. The court watched in shock. The lords who had laughed at Elias now trembled as they saw him fight. The princess who had once despised him now stood at his shoulder. Together they were not husband and wife in mockery, but warriors, bound by battle. The fighting spilled into the great hall. Crystal pillars shattered. Fire burned across the walls. Aranel's arm ached. Her breath came heavy, yet when she stumbled, Elias caught her, pulling her close. "Stand," he whispered. "We end this together." Her heart surged at his words, and with him, she rose again. At last, the leader of the invaders appeared. Clad in dark armor, his weapon dripping with fire, he sneered at the sight of Elias. "A human dares to raise a sword in our halls," he growled. Elias stepped forward, calm as stone. "I am no longer just a husband," he said. "I am the blade you feared but did not see." Their clash shook the hall, steel against steel. The enemy struck with rage. Elias answered with precision. The lords held their breath, the servants cowered, and Aranel's eyes never left him. Every movement he made, every strike he gave, she saw not only a warrior, but the man fate had tied to her. At last, Elias's blade cut true. The enemy leader fell, silence crashing over the hall. The invaders fled, their courage broken. The palace still burned, but the empire had been saved, not by its lords, not by its armies, but by the human they had called harmless. Aranel stood beside him, her silver hair tangled with ash. Her chest heaving, she looked at Elias, and for the first time, she spoke without pride. "You are not what I thought you were," she whispered. Elias's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "And you are not as untouchable as you believed." Their eyes held each other, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two warriors bound by fire. And in that silence, something greater than battle was born, something no empire could ever command. The palace still burned from the battle. The air was heavy with smoke and fear. The lords of Zaith gathered once more, their voices sharp and desperate. "This cannot continue," one hissed. "The human is too dangerous. He must be removed," another shouted. "He stands taller than our warriors. He shames us before our people." Princess Aranel listened in silence, her heart torn. She had seen Elias bleed for her, fight for her, stand unbroken when all others faltered. He was no longer a joke, no longer a humiliation. He was the man who had saved her life, and perhaps her empire. Yet the lords could not see it. Their pride blinded them. Their fear turned them cruel. Elias was summoned to the great hall. He entered with steady steps, his sword at his side. The court glared down at him like wolves. "Human," the High Lord said, "you have fought with skill, but your presence brings danger. You will kneel, swear eternal loyalty, and lay down your blade, or you will die." The hall fell silent, all eyes on him. Elias looked at them, calm and unshaken. "I did not bleed for chains," he said. "I did not fight to be your servant." His voice echoed across the crystal walls, stronger than the Lord's commands. "I fight for freedom. I fight for truth. And I will never kneel to fear." Gasps filled the chamber. Swords were drawn. The guards closed in, their weapons pointed at him. But before they could strike, Aranel rose from her throne. Her voice rang clear, sharp as steel. "Enough," she commanded. The hall froze. She stepped down, standing beside Elias. Her silver hair shone in the firelight. Her eyes fierce. "You call him dangerous. You call him a threat, but it is not he who has failed," she said. "It is you, lords who hide behind pride, who cannot see the truth before your eyes." Her words cut through the court like a blade. The lords shouted in anger, but their power cracked under her defiance. She turned to Elias, her heart burning with something she could no longer hide. "I once thought you were harmless," she whispered, "but I was blind." Her hand brushed against his, her voice steady. "You are my sword, my shield, my equal." The court erupted in chaos, but the sound no longer mattered, for in that moment, a bond was forged, stronger than blood or throne. The princess and the human stood together, united not by mockery, but by choice. And all who saw them knew something greater than the dominion had begun. Elias raised his sword, his voice calm but unbreakable. "You gave me to her as a joke," he said, "but I stand now as her husband, her warrior, her ally." He looked across the hall, his eyes steady as fire. "And if you fear me, then know this, you should fear her more, for together we are not your weakness. We are your end." The lords faltered, their arrogance trembling, for the empire had been built on pride. But now pride itself had turned against them, and in the shadows of the burning hall, a new legend was born. The harmless husband was gone. In his place stood a warrior who carried both sword and destiny, and at his side, the princess who chose him. Together they would shape a future no empire could stop.